Welcome to another episode of Mission Compliance, Unleashing Growth Potential for Defense Contractors. In today's episode, we continue down the road of understanding CMMC, its regulations, and controls. Up next is CM.L2-3.4.7. Restrict, disable, or prevent the use of non-essential programs, functions, ports, protocols, and services. We'll break down what this control means, why it matters, and how it impacts your organization's cybersecurity posture. We'll also provide practical insights and strategies for achieving compliance and securing your systems effectively. So whether you're a defense contractor aiming to win more contracts or simply someone interested in bolstering your cybersecurity knowledge, you're in the right place. Hasta la vista, baby. We're joined once again today by Mike Frieder, President of On-Call Compliance Solutions and a CMMC Professional Assessor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, it's great to see you, Roman.
So, Mike, today we're talking about restriction of non-essential programs. So let's jump right into it. Why is this control important?
Yeah, so this control is this is a control that essentially is put together as a way to not wiggle out of the intent of another control. Kind of interesting. So there is a control that essentially is that you have to restrict users and systems to being able to operate in a least privilege type of manner. This control essentially reinforces that control under the fourth control family, and is, I guess you would say, sort of the mechanics behind it, right? So the principle of least privilege is a principle, and you kind of have to demonstrate a principle through documentation, right? You wouldn't demonstrate a principle through a technical um, setting alone. So they have one control that essentially what they really want you to do is show me some documentation proving the way you're running this organization or this system is via least privilege possible. Then they have this control 347, restrict, disable, or prevent the use of non-essential programs, functions, ports, protocols, and services, almost like as a demonstration of these are the things that are involved that you need to restrict down to least privilege necessary to get your job done. And so, the importance of it is a mechanical and a compliance check to say, prove to me that you're actually executing on this principle of least privilege security protocol. And so that's really what the point of this is. If you look at it, I think this might be one of the longest control answers throughout the entire compliance standard. I mean, there's A through O for assessment objectives. I can't even count what A through O is. I don't know how many that is, but I know it goes A through O. That's like half the alphabet. So, it's substantial. It's a heavy duty control. And I will also tell you that this control in particular is a control that is very easy to fail. It's very easy to fail because there are so many assessment objectives that you have to prove to an assessor. And so this is really one that, again, if you're listening to this podcast, you're responsible for compliance, especially if you're going to go for CMMC certification. This is a really important one to take your time on. You've really got to dial in exactly what is going to be used to solve for each assessment objective. It's not like a lot of other controls where you're just sort of having a technical thing you do plus a policy stating that you should be doing this technical thing you do, and they all need to line up. This is like 10, 12 different things that need to be done. So yeah, that's what is the importance of it? The importance of it is to get at the nuts and bolts of how you're executing the principle of least privilege and proving that you're doing that, and proving that you've thought that through and proving that you have all of the actual implementation done on that. That is for sure why this is a separate control, right? No longer are we at the point where we're looking at the principles that you have in place. Now we're looking at the technical capabilities of the system to perform in a manner consistent with the principle of least privilege.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. This one has a lot of control points, A through O. That's 15, which is more than half the alphabet. Um, so let's dive headfirst into it. What are they?
Yeah, let's rock and roll. This will be a long one. So, first question is how many letters are there in the alphabet?
26.
All right, so that's good. I didn't know that. I thought it was 27 to be honest with you, but
Close.
uh, that's why there's only 6 letters in on call. All right, so assessment objective A, determine if essential pro. By the way, if it starts sounding redundant or repetitive, that would not surprise me because there is a lot of repetitive stuff, but in fact, there's no repetitive objective points. They are all nuanced to make sure that we're covering our bases, and that's the point. So, first one is determine if essential programs are defined. Well, we know that anytime you see the word defined, that means it's got to be in a document somewhere. It's got to be documented. So essential programs are defined by the IT team. So that's who's doing the defining. Only the IT team can allow program installation. Essential programs are defined in the baseline configuration documentation. Boom, there it is. There's your hint, ladies and gentlemen. Baseline configuration documentation is going to be very important for this control. You should have what your settings are, what you're allowing, what you're not allowing. They've got to all be defined in the baseline documentation, excuse me, the baseline configuration documentation. It's a tongue twister, by the way. If you try to say baseline documentation configuration and baseline configuration documentation backwards 3 times fast, you will learn to speak German. I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure that's how it works. All right, assessment number two, assessment objective number two, determine if the use of non-essential programs is defined. We say non-essential programs are defined as those programs which are not allowed to be installed on organizational systems. Deny all, permit by exception is how the system works. Non-essential programs are defined as all programs which are not installed by IT staff or denied by endpoint protection software. So that covers you for your whitelisting, blacklisting, and it covers you for malicious software, which your endpoint management system may deny for one reason or another. Defined as all programs which are not installed by IT staff or denied by endpoint protection software, which limits who can install software. Uh, Next, assessment point. Determine if the use of non-essential programs is restricted, disabled, or prevented as defined. So now the question is, okay, so if it's not essential, do we stop it from happening? Non-essential programs are not allowed to be installed on organizational systems. They are deny all, permit by exception. Now, in our case, oftentimes we're recommending a great solution called Threat Locker. We're huge fans of Threat Locker. Again, if for all of our clients where we're doing management, we're using Threat Locker. Look, Threat Locker doesn't allow anything to execute that is not pre-authorized. It is an awesome system. It's full whitelisting. It's very efficient for users to work with. It works, and it's truly a really great system to do this. Can you use group policy to do it? Yes, you can. You can restrict new program installation through group policy. I don't think it's as comprehensive in terms of what it is capable of, like Threat Locker is. Threat Locker can stop one program executing another program. Group policy typically can't do that. And there's all kinds of other really cool security stuff it does. But at the end of the day, that is how we would go about solving that. Now, next assessment objective, for those who are counting, we are on D. D is for determine if essential functions are defined. So have we defined what it is that is allowed to be done? Yes, essential functions are defined by those functions authorized to execute by group policy. Remember, you guys, we in our system sometimes will mix group policy and other methodologies, but in this case, we are defining it using group policy. Group policy is determined by the IT team in coordination with information owners. Other ways that you can do that, you can certainly define essential functions within Threat Locker, right? So your whitelisting, blacklisting software. Lots of ways to deal with that. And then, other ways that you can do it is you can do it through documentation. So you can do it that way and say, hey, only these programs, only these functions, are defined. So lots of places that they can be defined. Very interesting. It can be defined within a technical system or within a document. Um, cool. Now, the next assessment objective, E, determine if the use of non-essential functions is defined. Do we actually define what is non-essential? Non-essential functions are not allowed to execute on organizational systems. Denial permit by exception. Functions are restricted via group policy, AD permissions, and system access restrictions. Now, we've got lots and lots of ways that we do it. In our sample or example. Again, you can have all kinds of different restrictions that are in your system, and really the key is you just need to define those. These restrictions are defined in organizational baseline documentation. Next, determine if the use of non-essential functions is restricted, disabled, or prevented as defined. Non-essential functions are not allowed to execute on organizational systems. Deny all, permit by exception. So again, if the use of non-essential functions is restricted, disabled, or prevented, you've got to demonstrate how that is happening. And again, that would honestly be probably an interview or a demonstration of your system and the things that you have in place to stop that from happening. Next is determine if essential ports are defined. Now we're transitioning to ports. Essential ports are defined within the firewall. Look, pop open Windows firewall, boom, you've got ports all over the place. Really easy solvency on this one. But again, another place you can do that is if you're running a traditional firewall, you can show off your access control list. You can show your ports blocked and ports allowed list. Here's a hint. Don't have an any rule in your firewall allowing anything through the firewall. Bad stuff. You will fail. Next, determine if essential ports are defined. Essential ports are defined within the firewall. So in our specific instance, we're saying go look in our firewall if you want to see what's defined. But all of those ports are in fact defined. Determine if the use of non-essential ports is defined. So non-essential ports are defined within the firewall as any port that is not essential. In other words, any port that is not denied. So if it's not allowed, it's a no-go. Next up, and in case you're keeping track with us, we are on assessment objective H. So many more to go. Determine if the use of non-essential ports is defined. Non-essential ports. Non-essential ports are defined within the firewall as any port that is not essential. Again, you can go back, you can look in the firewall, you can see those settings. Hey, the good news is some of these answers are pretty easy and pretty straightforward. Again, you want to watch out. If it was me, you might want to document how your firewall policies are in some kind of written documentation. I think that would really help out quite a bit in terms of the assessors really knowing that you've got your game together. Next, determine if the use of non-essential ports is restricted, disabled, or prevented as defined. So, are we actively restricting the use of those ports that aren't needed? We say non-essential ports are any port that is not defined as permit. Non-essential ports are defined as deny all. So again, your firewall should be set up in a deny all, permit by exception basis, and your firewall is going to contain a whole bunch of permit rules, and that's going to be how we solve for I. Now, looking at J, determine if essential protocols are defined. Non-essential protocols are defined within the firewall as any port that is not essential. Obviously, if it's essential, it's going to be defined in the firewall as permitted. So again, kind of interesting there. But you do need, this is one of those places where you can read the control, you can read the assessment objective, and it should just be easier to answer this, but it is not. Determine if the use of non-essential, like for instance, why instead of using the word essential, why don't they just use determine if allowed protocols are defined and if denied protocols are defined? I don't know why they don't do that. To me, I just think it's a poor choice of words. I think it could be done better. It certainly could be made clearer and easier for people trying to comply with this. But that's why you watch these videos. That's why you listen to the podcast, is to find out all of that hidden information that's taken us years to develop. Next, determine if the use of non-essential protocols is defined. Non-essential protocols are any protocol that is not defined as permit. Non-essential protocols are defined as deny all. Determine if the use of non-essential protocols is restricted, disabled, or prevented as defined. Non-essential protocols are any protocol that is not defined as permit. Non-essential protocols are defined as deny all. There's lots and lots of ways to do this. Again, for the protocols, they can be done in firewalls. That's most common. Another way to do that is through your endpoint management software that may have an ability to block certain protocols. For instance, what are those file sharing sites that, not Wares. That's the old school. That's how old I am in this business. Oh gosh, what's it called? It's BitTorrent. Yeah, so it could be like BitTorrent protocols that are blocked. Sorry about that. It could be some of those that are blocked, but ultimately, those can be done in a lot of different ways. Firewalls, endpoint management software, you name it. Even other kinds of software like ThreatLocker can block protocols as well. And then final assessment point. What happened to it's just the final one on this page. We're not even close to done. Thought we were done. Nope. Still like one big giant run-on sentence. This control. Determine if essential services are defined. Essential services are defined in the organization's baseline configuration documentation and inventory. Again, we're referring back to that baseline configuration documentation. The reality is all of this stuff is in that document, but in this particular one, we're again hitting that word defined, and so we have to put it and tell them what that policy is. Next, determine if the use of non-essential services is defined. Defining the organization's baseline configuration, documentation, inventory. C, Active Directory. So now we got a different reference to a different location. Active Directory is going to have where those service accounts are. Big hint. All right. Bang my wall against that one. Bang my head against the wall on that one for quite a while until we figure that out. You're going to go back and look in your Active Directory or Entra ID for that one for permitted service accounts. Endpoint protection software limits non-essential services based on definitions provided by the vendor, of course. And then our final assessment objective point, determine if the use of non-essential services is restricted, disabled, or prevented as defined. Non-essential services are restricted by the organization's firewall and endpoint management solutions. Endpoint protection software limits non-essential services based on definitions. And again, ultimately, all of this combined really leads us to a pretty comprehensive layered security approach. And that's the point of the control. And you know what, Roman? That is the exhaustive marathon that is running through these assessment objectives.
Take a breath while I read this last question nice and slow. Um, what are the potential difficulties of enacting this one in an organization with all these different points and different things? What are the difficulties?
Yeah, it's funny. You'll oftentimes see me on these podcasts kind of sipping from some sort of energy drink or in this today's a little bit of Dunkin' coffee, right? It's like, you got to get jacked up on caffeine to get excited about these compliance controls.
You need it after reading all of that.
I tell you what, man, it's once in a while we get somebody on our YouTube channel who will go like, I'll see it in the comments, someone will go, Mike's content is awesome. All you have to do is play it at 0.5x speed and you can totally understand what he's talking about. Well,
Especially with some of
maybe
those later points, you could tell you're just trying to get through them, but that's
that's
okay.
that's it, man. Maybe it's just a little bit of my caffeine addiction to fuel me through the day. Yeah, what's tough about this control? I think this is probably not one of the tougher controls to implement. I think the reality for most organizations is they're going to have antivirus, they're going to have firewall. I would probably say that some organizations we run into are not mature enough to have the application whitelisting and blacklisting. So some of those assessment points like, A, B, yeah, A, B, and C, those are the ones talking about programs. I think for some organizations, that might be a step up in security to really look at the idea of something like a threat locker. That's obviously what we recommend. Big fans of that software. Or, Symantec's got some solutions out there. FortiGate, I think, has some solutions out there. There's one with VMware, Carbon Black as well. I love Carbon Black. I just don't, we don't see VMware used as much since that crazy takeover by, I think it was Broadcom, where they like quadruple the license or 10x the licensing cost or something. Everybody's jumping off the VMware ship like crazy. Um, all of that to say that, it is what it is. I think the program part is a little tougher. It's a maturing point for companies to whitelist software. Small companies are afraid to do it because they're like, oh my God, we're gonna do nothing all day but answer tickets for people installing and updating software. Hey, look, we got a big team over here. We're handling thousands of endpoints and we do it just fine. I think ThreatLocker's got some amazing support for that kind of thing that I won't go into in this podcast, but it's a maturing point. So I think that if you can answer this control, a lot of other controls will be much easier. I think the other part that people will really stumble on, as I think a lot of companies will truly stumble on documentation in general, is that you're just not going to know what's going on with the documentation, right? If you haven't been through an audit, I can't emphasize this enough. This is really where a company like OnCall is so critical. If you haven't been through this stuff before, then you got to go through it with a professional specialist like us before you dare touch some sort of a CMMC self-attestation or certification. The level of documentation, I was just looking this morning, I think that out of the box, before we get to really customizing things, we have a base plate of 40 different policies and standard operating procedures. There's 110 controls. The majority of those controls have the word define in them, which means there's a lot of documentation and policies and standard operating procedures that you've just got to have if you're going to be compliant with this. So I think that could be another thing is there's several words called define throughout this control, and you really need to be defining what you're doing. I'm with you guys. If you got 50 users and you're a basic, tier two IT guy and you're supporting this network, you're like just trying to keep your head above water and keep the system up and running, and that's all you got, right? But it's not good enough. It's just it's not you're not meeting compliance just doing that. So you're going to have to work to really get your documentation in line. Your superiors are going to have to understand that you're going to have to be resourced to allow you time to create this documentation. It's just simply required by law. So I think that's another thing that they really struggle with. And then there's a couple on here that I think are a little bit tricky. Things like, the protocols. A lot of people don't realize that protocols are really more or less handled through the firewall by ports. But nonetheless, the ports need to be named. They get named on what protocol they're blocking. So there's a couple of like general IT knowledge issues that are like higher level IT issues that if you're not a pretty seasoned IT guy, you might be really scratching your head pretty hard on this one. So yeah, I think that's without really diving specifically, right? Like you got, what did we say, 15 different objective points? Is that what it was? A through O?
15,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, 15 different places to get tripped up, 15 different things you need to do, and 15 different places where you've just honestly got to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row. It's a big control. It's a big control.
So if you've been with us for 85 episodes now, you know the drill. That was the compliance portion, and now Mike will try to bring it back to the main topic by navigating my silly question. Because we like to, as Mike said, he sometimes has to take a drink of something to get through some of the more robust compliance you know topics. So we like to liven it up towards the end with a silly question. But Mike is often very good at bringing it back around, so I like to try to stump him. And I have to say that today's question is one of my favorites that I've ever asked. So we're
Uh-oh, I'm in
talking
trouble.
about we're talking about restricting and disabling and preventing non-essential programs and that kind of thing. And we've talked about, should you put a pressure plate on the floor? Should you be required to do push-ups if you're locked out of your computer after too many failed password attempts? So this is in that same vein as Mike, as a business owner, as the owner of On Call. If someone within your organization tried to access a restricted or disabled program, would you approve of a loud alarm sounding as a large cage dropped from the ceiling and trapped them within it if they were to try to access one of these programs?
The answer is no. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm the worst offender in our entire company. We do a lot of research and development here at OnCall. We're constantly researching and developing, issues related to cybersecurity, keeping defense contractors safe. That involves installing new programs, playing with programs that even sometimes can be potentially dangerous. And I have to tell you that, I am, as our service department will tell you, I'm like the worst guy out of all of our systems when it comes to that. I'm constantly, working with software that needs to be updated and doing new and innovative things. So look, I think the critical thing is that your organization has controls over the software and those people who are trying to innovate, try to do R&D. You may even need a sandbox. That's fine. Just separate your sandbox from where CUI lives. It's not that hard. But I don't think people need to be penalized because they're trying new things. But I definitely think that you need to be monitored. Here's a great example. I have a computer in my office that is full compliance protocols, full security, and I am 110% aware that this thing is monitored by my entire security staff. I have a second identical computer sitting right next to it for when I need to do things that are just simply not compliant for defense work. And, I think that there's a lot of business owners and people out there who may be new to defense work, or maybe they're smaller companies who would just have their mind blown by that reality. But the reality is, that is reality. That's what you got to do. If you want to be able to do things, for instance, I have policies on my DoD computer where I can't hook up USB external drives. Obviously, we're doing these podcasts, we're doing YouTube videos and things like that. When I go to insert, a USB card into a computer, I can't transfer data on my DoD computer. with that thumb drive. It just doesn't allow it. We have policies in place to block that sort of thing. So I have a side-by-side computer. Does it cost me an extra two, three, $4,000 every 3 to 4 years to have two computers instead of one? Sure, it does. But I make enough money, from the defense work, and we just simply what we do is we factor that in to our work with clients, right? It's simply put, as a result of the security requirements, it costs an extra $3,000 or $4,000 every 3 years to put a second computer on certain select people's desks in my company who need a secure apparatus versus a non-secured apparatus to do various levels of work. That's the law. That's how it works. So, it's kind of one of those things. And, yes, I've got VLANs in separation, even in some of our remote offices. And the bottom line is that this is what you got to do. This is how it works. So I think in that regard, I think that's one of the things. Would I sound the alarm? No. But would I have systems that would alert my IT staff? Yes. But I don't need to hear the alarm. I'm going to see the messages. I'm going to see, as a matter of fact, I literally went through it this morning. I was using a find and replace program to update a lot of policies we have for something. And, I had to request permission to get an update on that program and all that other kind of stuff. But no, it's not something to penalize people over. I think that when you implement an application whitelisting software, you will inevitably have a little bit of time, maybe a month, probably less than a month where there is cultural adaptation. It happens fast. That's the good news. So yeah, no need to drop a cage on me because I'm the worst offender. But there is definitely a need to have the technical controls in place to meet 347 and you know what? Save the cage for people looking at really creepy stuff. Maybe you can drop the cage on them.
For a second, I felt like I was gonna have to bring the question back. That felt like you were gonna try to skirt the actual question, but you got it in there at the end. So I'll take it. Uh, and that wraps up another great episode of Mission Compliance. We hope our discussion today has provided you with valuable insights, practical strategies, and inspiration to navigate the ever-evolving world of defense. We'd like to thank Mike for joining us and talking about the importance of restricting non-essential programs. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman. Thank you.
But the conversation does not end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and connect with us via our social media channels. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with fellow listeners using the hashtag Mission Compliance Podcast. If they haven't already, what should they do, Mike?
They should like, subscribe, and you know what? Tell a friend because we're having fun over here, and we're helping you guys get compliant, and that's what really matters.
You heard him. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you always know when new episodes like this one are released. We truly appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you thought-provoking episodes and high-quality content. Join us next time as we delve further into the dynamic world of defense, security, and industry innovation. Until then, take care, stay informed, and make compliance your mission. See you next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody.